You wake up this morning and check your phone. You take medicine for a headache. You wash your hands with soap. You drink a cup of coffee. You check the weather forecast. You put on your glasses to read. You plan to fly somewhere next month. What if I told you that every single one of these actions, things so ordinary you don't even think about them, connects you to Muslim scientists whose names you've probably never heard? We all know about the giants. Al-Khwarizmi, who gave us algebra, Ibn al-Haytham, who pioneered optics, Al-Idrisi, who revolutionized medicine, Al-Battani, whose astronomical tables guided navigators for centuries, and Al-Zarawi, the father of modern surgery. In part 1 of this series, we explored their incredible contributions to human knowledge. But the Islamic Golden Age wasn't built by just 5 men. It was built by hundreds of brilliant minds, each pushing the boundaries of human understanding in different directions. Today, we're going to meet the forgotten scientists, the men and women whose names have faded from history but whose work literally changed the world. The woman who taught at the world's first university. The man who discovered blood circulation 400 years before Europe. The inventor who built machines that wouldn't be matched for 700 years. The female astronomer who corrected the errors of the ancient Greeks. These aren't minor figures who made small contributions. These are scientists whose breakthroughs were so fundamental, so revolutionary, that modern civilization would look completely different without them. And yet, their names have been erased from our textbooks, their achievements attributed to others, their legacy forgotten by all but a handful of historians. Until today, because we're about to resurrect their stories and give them the recognition they deserve. The great Greek physician Galen had taught that blood passed directly from the right side of the heart to the left through invisible pores in the septum, the wall dividing the heart's chambers. This teaching had been accepted without question for over 1,000 years. But Ibn al-Nafis looked at the heart's anatomy and realized it was impossible. In his commentary on anatomy in Avicenna's canon, he wrote with remarkable clarity, "The blood from the right chamber of the heart must arrive at the left chamber, but there is no direct pathway between them. The thick septum of the heart is not perforated and does not have visible pores as some people thought, or invisible pores as Galen thought. The blood from the right chamber must flow through the vena arteriosa, pulmonary artery, to the lungs, spread through its substances, be mingled there with air, pass through the arteria venosa, pulmonary vein, to reach the left chamber of the heart and there form the vital spirit. This is it. This is the pulmonary circulation, the movement of blood from the heart to the lungs and back, described with stunning accuracy in the 13th century. Ibn al-Nafis understood that blood had to pass through the lungs to be mixed with air, oxygenated, though he didn't use that term, before returning to the heart. He went further. He understood that the heart had coronary arteries that supplied it with blood. He understood the function of the heart valves. He even theorized about capillaries, tiny blood vessels connecting arteries and veins, though he couldn't see them without a microscope. How did he make these discoveries? Through pure logic and anatomical observation. Islamic law generally prohibited human dissection, but Ibn al-Nafis studied animal hearts and used rigorous reasoning to understand human anatomy. He proved that pure thought, combined with careful observation, could reveal truths that had been hidden for a millennium. His work was written down, preserved, and studied throughout the Islamic world. It was translated into Latin and was likely read by European physicians. Yet when William Harvey published his own description of circulation 4 centuries later, Ibn al-Nafis's name had been forgotten. But Ibn al-Nafis wasn't just a one-discovery wonder. He wrote extensively on medicine, producing a massive medical encyclopedia that covered everything from diet to surgery. He wrote on Islamic jurisprudence. He even wrote what might be the first science fiction novel in Arabic literature, Theologus Autodidactus, a story about a man spontaneously generated on a deserted island who discovers scientific and religious truths through reason alone. Today, medical historians acknowledge Ibn al-Nafis as the true discoverer of pulmonary circulation. But ask the average person or even the average doctor, and they'll tell you it was Harvey. The forgotten Syrian physician deserves his place in history. Fatima al-Fihri, the woman who founded the world's first university. In the year 859 CE, in the bustling Moroccan city of Fez, a wealthy woman named Fatima al-Fihri inherited a fortune from her merchant father. She could have lived a life of luxury. Instead, she did something that would echo through the centuries. She used her entire inheritance to found an educational institution. Al-Qarawiyyin wasn't just a mosque or a madrasa. It was the world's first degree-granting university, an institution that issued certificates of completion, had a formal curriculum, and brought together scholars from across the Islamic world to teach and study. Fatima al-Fihri oversaw every detail of the construction. She fasted from the first day of building until its completion, vowing not to eat any food she hadn't earned through her own work on the project. The university took over 20 years to complete, and she lived to see it finished. But what made Al-Qarawiyyin truly revolutionary wasn't just its buildings. It was its vision. This was an institution dedicated to the systematic pursuit of knowledge. It had a formal curriculum covering Islamic law and theology, but also mathematics, astronomy, medicine, chemistry, history, geography, and linguistics. It had a library that would eventually house some of the world's most important manuscripts. It had accommodation for students from distant lands. Most importantly, it had standards. Students had to complete specific courses in a specific order. They had to demonstrate mastery through examinations. They received ijazas, formal certificates that authorized them to teach the material themselves. This system of academic degrees, created by a Muslim woman in 9th century Morocco, is the direct ancestor of every bachelor's degree, master's degree, and doctorate granted today. Al-Qarawiyyin attracted some of the greatest minds in Islamic history. The philosopher Averroes Ibn Rushd studied there, a man we'll be covering in detail in part 3 of this series, along with other giants like the geographer Al-Idrisi, the botanist Al-Dinawari, and the astronomers Nasir al-Din al-Tusi and al-Sufi. The historian Ibn Khaldun taught there. Pope Sylvester II, who introduced Arabic numerals to Europe, studied there. Jewish philosopher Maimonides was influenced by its scholars. The university pioneered teaching methods still used today. The lecture system, the seminar format, the use of written examinations, the thesis defense. All of these innovations came from Islamic educational institutions, with Al-Qarawiyyin leading the way. And it still exists. Al-Qarawiyyin University has been in continuous operation for over 1,160 years, making it the oldest continuously operating educational institution in the world, according to UNESCO and Guinness World Records. Students still study there today, walking halls that have echoed with scholarly debate for more than a millennium. Yet Fatima al-Fihri's name is barely known outside academic circles. When people list the founders of the world's great universities, they mention Bologna, founded 1088, Oxford, founded around 1096, Cambridge, founded 1209. Al-Qarawiyyin, founded in 859, predates them all. And it was founded by a woman whose vision of education continues to shape how we learn today. Al-Jazari, the genius inventor. In the year 1206, a mechanical engineer named Ismail al-Jazari completed a book that would showcase some of the most remarkable machines ever created. The Book of Knowledge of Ingenious Mechanical Devices described 100 different inventions, each meticulously illustrated and explained. These weren't theoretical machines. Al-Jazari built them, tested them, and refined them. Al-Jazari was chief engineer at the Artukid Palace in what is now southeastern Turkey. His job was to create amazing devices to entertain and impress the court. But in the process of building elaborate fountains, automata, and clocks, he invented technologies that were centuries ahead of their time. Consider his elephant clock, perhaps his most famous creation. This wasn't just a timepiece. It was a masterpiece of multicultural symbolism and mechanical ingenuity. An elephant, representing Indian and African cultures, carried a structure that incorporated a phoenix, Chinese culture, dragons, Chinese culture, a carpet, Persian culture, and human figures, Arabic culture. Every half hour, the mechanism would activate. A bird would chirp, balls would fall, and the whole assembly would move in a carefully choreographed sequence. But the real genius was in the mechanism itself. Al-Jazari used a constant head tank, a container that maintained water at a constant level, ensuring consistent flow and accurate timekeeping. This principle wouldn't appear in European clocks for several more centuries. His water-raising machines were equally impressive. The chain pump he designed featured an innovative reverse gear system, essentially the first known use of a reversible gear system in history. This allowed the pump to be driven efficiently in either direction. The principle behind Al-Jazari's design is still used in modern automotive transmissions. He created the first programmable automata, robot-like machines that could be programmed to perform different tasks. His famous robot band, which floated on a boat and played music, could be configured to play different melodies by adjusting pegs and cams. This is the same principle that would later be used in music boxes, player pianos, and eventually computer punch cards. Al-Jazari invented the camshaft, which converts rotary motion into linear motion, a fundamental component in every car engine today. He created elaborate water fountains with interchangeable parts, demonstrating the concept of standardization in manufacturing. He designed secure locks with combination mechanisms. He built automatic gates. He created water clocks with innovative escapement mechanisms. Perhaps most remarkably, he documented everything with extraordinary precision. His illustrations are so detailed that modern engineers have been able to reconstruct his machines exactly. He explained not just how to build each device, but why it worked, what problems might arise, and how to fix them. His work influenced European inventors for centuries. Leonardo da Vinci's drawings show clear influences from Al-Jazari's designs. The great clockmakers of medieval Europe built on foundations he laid. The Industrial Revolution relied on mechanical principles he pioneered. Yet Al-Jazari remains virtually unknown outside specialized academic circles. He was essentially the Leonardo da Vinci of the Islamic world, except he lived 300 years earlier. The machines he built in the early 13th century wouldn't be matched in Europe until the Renaissance. Ibn Zuhr, the pioneer of clinical medicine. Abu Marwan ibn Zuhr, known in the West as Avenzoar, was a 12th century physician from Seville who helped create modern clinical medicine, the practice of actually examining patients, testing diagnoses, and learning from direct observation rather than just reading ancient texts. Ibn Zuhr came from a family of physicians spanning 5 generations. His father taught him medicine, but Ibn Zuhr surpassed his teacher by insisting on something radical. Actually testing medical theories on patients and animals rather than just accepting traditional wisdom. He performed the first experimental tracheotomy on an animal, creating an opening in the windpipe to allow breathing when the throat is obstructed. This procedure has saved countless lives in emergencies. He pioneered it in the 12th century. He was the first to provide a correct description of scabies, identifying it as caused by a parasite, the first time a specific disease was linked to a specific organism. This understanding of disease transmission was revolutionary, predating the germ theory of disease by 700 years. Ibn Zuhr performed some of the earliest clinical trials. He would test treatments on groups of patients, observe the results, and adjust his methods accordingly. This evidence-based approach to medicine was unheard of in his time. Most physicians simply followed Galen or other ancient authorities without question. Ibn Zuhr questioned everything. He described pericarditis, inflammation of the heart's outer covering, for the first time. He pioneered cancer therapy through diet and drugs. He recommended nutritional therapy for tuberculosis patients, understanding that diet played a role in recovery from illness. He also made significant contributions to surgery, performing the first documented postmortem dissection to determine cause of death, an early form of autopsy. He experimented with surgical procedures on animals before attempting them on humans, establishing an early principle of medical ethics. But perhaps his greatest contribution was his insistence on personal observation. He wrote, "He who studies anatomy from books alone is like he who would learn of a country from maps." He believed physicians needed to examine actual patients, not just theorize about disease. His major work, Kitab al-Tazir fil Mutawat wal Tadbir, Book of Simplification Concerning Therapeutics and Diet, was translated into Latin and used in European medical schools for centuries. The book was remarkably practical, focusing on treatments that actually worked rather than elaborate theories about bodily humors. Ibn Zuhr also pioneered the idea of specialization in medicine. While most physicians of his time claimed expertise in all areas, Ibn Zuhr recognized that medicine was becoming too complex for any one person to master completely. He advocated for physicians to focus on specific areas, an idea that seems obvious today but was revolutionary in the 12th century. Yet his name has been largely forgotten, overshadowed by other Islamic physicians. When medical history is taught, Ibn Zuhr rarely gets more than a footnote, despite the fact that his insistence on clinical observation and experimental method laid the groundwork for modern medicine. Maryam al-Ajliya, the master astrolabe maker. In 10th century Aleppo, a woman named Maryam al-Ajliya achieved fame throughout the Islamic world for her extraordinary skill in creating astrolabes, complex astronomical instruments used for navigation, telling time, and calculating the positions of celestial bodies. The astrolabe was essentially the smartphone of the medieval world, a single device that could solve dozens of different problems. Sailors used them for navigation. Astronomers used them to track celestial movements. Muslims used them to determine prayer times and the direction of Mecca. Scientists used them for surveying and timekeeping. Creating a good astrolabe required profound knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, and metalworking. The instrument had to be precisely calibrated for specific latitudes. The engraving had to be exact. A small error could make the device useless. It required artistic skill to make it beautiful and technical skill to make it functional. Maryam al-Ajliya mastered all of these skills. Historical sources, including the renowned historian Ibn al-Nadim, specifically mention her as an accomplished astrolabe maker working in 10th century Syria. This wasn't just unusual because she was a woman, it was unusual because astrolabe making was considered one of the most intellectually demanding crafts. She worked during the reign of Saif al-Dawla, ruler of Aleppo, who maintained a court that attracted some of the greatest scholars and artists of the age. To be recognized as a master craftsperson in such company speaks to exceptional ability. Think about what this means. Maryam wasn't just following instructions. She understood spherical trigonometry, astronomical calculations, and precision metalwork. She could convert three-dimensional celestial movements into two-dimensional representations on brass plates. She could engrave Arabic numerals and astronomical symbols with precision measured in millimeters. Her astrolabes would have been used by sailors crossing oceans, by scholars making astronomical observations, by travelers navigating deserts. Each one was a testament to the sophistication of Islamic science and to the fact that women could and did participate in the highest levels of scientific and technical work. Unfortunately, we don't know if any of her astrolabes survive today. Medieval instruments rarely bore makers' marks, and many have been lost to time. But her mention in historical sources tells us that she was recognized by her contemporaries as exceptional in her field. Maryam al-Ajliya represents something important. She's proof that the golden age of Islam provided opportunities for talented women in science and technology. While gender roles were certainly traditional by modern standards, they weren't absolute barriers to intellectual achievement. In our next episode, we'll meet more astronomical geniuses like al-Sufi, who mapped the stars with unprecedented accuracy, and Nasir al-Din al-Tusi, whose astronomical tables were used for centuries. Al-Biruni, the first anthropologist. Abu Rayhan al-Biruni was a polymath who lived from 973 to 1048, and calling him a forgotten scientist is almost unfair. He's well known among historians of science. But he's virtually unknown to the general public, despite achievements that rival any scientist in history. Al-Biruni was born in what is now Uzbekistan and spent much of his life traveling throughout the Islamic world and India. He wrote over 150 books on subjects ranging from astronomy to anthropology, from mathematics to mineralogy, from pharmacology to history. But what makes Al-Biruni truly remarkable is his scientific method. In an age when most scholars simply repeated what ancient authorities had said, Al-Biruni insisted on observation, measurement, and verification. He was, in many ways, the first true experimental scientist. Consider his calculation of Earth's radius. Al-Biruni developed an ingenious new method. He climbed to the top of a mountain, measured its height, and measured the angle to the horizon. Using trigonometry, and his measurements were astonishingly precise, he calculated Earth's radius as 6,339.6 kilometers. The actual value is 6,371 kilometers. His error was less than 0.5%, achieved in the 11th century with primitive instruments. He calculated the speed of light and determined it was faster than sound, an insight that wouldn't be widely accepted in Europe for centuries. He explained that the Earth rotates on its axis, an idea that most Europeans wouldn't accept until the time of Copernicus, 500 years later. But perhaps al-Biruni's most remarkable achievement was his work in what we'd now call anthropology and comparative religion. When he traveled to India, he didn't just observe from the outside, he learned Sanskrit, studied Hindu texts, and tried to understand Indian culture and religion on their own terms. His book Tahqiq Ma-li al-Hind, An Investigation of India, is extraordinary for its objectivity and respect. At a time when most travelers simply declared foreign customs strange or barbaric, al-Biruni approached Indian culture as a subject worthy of serious study. He described Hindu beliefs, practices, and scientific knowledge without ridicule or condemnation. He wrote, "We must clear our minds of all causes of confusion and remove them. We must observe the manners of the people, their habits and customs, as impartially as possible." This is essentially a description of modern anthropological method, written in the 11th century. Al-Biruni was also a linguist, mathematician, and geographer. He catalogued minerals and gems. He calculated the specific gravity of various substances with remarkable accuracy. He wrote histories of nations. He translated scientific works between languages. Yet despite this incredible breadth and depth of knowledge, despite innovations that wouldn't be matched for centuries, al-Biruni remains largely unknown outside academic circles. He should be as famous as Galileo or Newton, but his name rarely appears in popular discussions of scientific history. Ibn Tufayl, the philosopher-scientist, Abu Bakr ibn Tufayl, who lived in 12th century Spain, wrote one of the most influential philosophical novels in history, Hayyan ibn Yaqzan, Alive, Son of Awake. The book tells the story of a child raised in isolation on a deserted island who, through observation and reason alone, discovers scientific truths and even arrives at religious understanding. This might sound like mere fiction, but it was actually a sophisticated philosophical argument about the relationship between reason and revelation, science and religion. Ibn Tufayl was using narrative to explore deep questions. Can human reason discover truth without divine revelation? How does scientific observation lead to understanding? What is the relationship between the natural world and the spiritual world? The novel was revolutionary in several ways. First, it presented the idea that humans could discover truths about the natural world through systematic observation and experimentation. Hay, the protagonist, essentially reinvents science by studying nature carefully, forming hypotheses, and testing them. Second, it proposed that reason and revelation, properly understood, would never truly conflict, an idea that was controversial but that many Islamic philosophers embraced. Ibn Tufayl argued that careful observation of nature could lead to understanding of divine truths. Third, it was simply a great story, engaging, thoughtful, and imaginative. It influenced European philosophy profoundly when it was translated into Latin in the 17th century. John Locke, who developed theories about the human mind as a blank slate, may have been influenced by it. Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe shows clear parallels. The entire European Enlightenment's ideas about natural law and human reason bear traces of Ibn Tufayl's influence. But Ibn Tufayl wasn't just a writer, he was also a physician and scientist. He served as court physician and vizier to the Almohad Caliph in Spain. He mentored the great philosopher Averroes, Ibn Rushd, whose groundbreaking work in philosophy we'll explore in detail in our next episode. He conducted his own scientific investigations. His novel proposed ideas that were centuries ahead of their time. Evolution through natural selection, Hay observes how creatures adapt to their environment, the scientific method, forming hypotheses and testing them, comparative anatomy, dissecting animals to understand their structure, and even early ideas about psychology and consciousness. Hayyan ibn Yaqzan was one of the first novels in world literature to use fiction to explore scientific and philosophical ideas systematically. It pioneered what we might call philosophical fiction or even science fiction, using imaginative narratives to explore serious intellectual questions. Yet Ibn Tufayl is barely remembered today, despite his profound influence on European thought. His book shaped the Enlightenment, but few of the Enlightenment thinkers who read it acknowledged their debt to this 12th century Spanish Muslim philosopher. Abbas ibn Firnas, the first person to fly. In the year 875 CE, in Córdoba, Spain, a man in his 70s climbed to the top of a hill wearing an apparatus of his own design. a pair of wings constructed from silk and wood, covered with feathers. Then he jumped. Abbas ibn Firnas had spent years studying bird flight. He observed how birds used their tails for steering and balance. He studied the aerodynamics of feathers. He understood that flying required not just wings but control surfaces. And on that day in 875, he put his theories to the test. He glided successfully for several minutes, covering a considerable distance. Witnesses reported that he flew for a significant time before landing. The landing was rough, he injured his back. But he had done it. He had flown. This was over 1,000 years before the Wright brothers. Over 600 years before Leonardo da Vinci drew his flying machines. Abbas ibn Firnas was the first person in history to design, build, and fly a controllable glider. After the flight, ibn Firnas analyzed what went wrong. He realized he had forgotten to design a tail mechanism for landing. He had focused on the wings but neglected the tail that birds used to slow down and control descent. It was a brilliant piece of scientific analysis. He didn't just attempt flight, he studied his failure to understand how to improve the design. But ibn Firnas wasn't just an aviation pioneer. He was a polymath who made contributions across multiple fields. He designed water clocks of innovative design. He created a planetarium in his house that simulated the night sky, complete with artificial clouds, thunder, and lightning, an early form of special effects technology. He developed new methods for cutting and processing rock crystal, allowing Spanish artisans to produce glass and crystal objects without importing them from Egypt. This innovation had significant economic impact, creating new industries in Spain. He composed poetry and music. He studied astronomy and mathematics. He was one of the first to use the Arabic musical notation system. He designed a chain of rings that could be used to simulate the motions of stars and planets, an early form of mechanical computer for astronomical calculations. His flying attempt inspired others. A few decades later, another inventor attempted flight using a similar design. The idea of human flight persisted in the Islamic world long before it emerged in Europe. Today, there's a crater on the moon named after him. Baghdad International Airport has a statue of him. But ask the average person who invented flight and they'll say the Wright brothers. Ibn Firnas's achievement, while certainly more primitive than powered flight, was no less courageous or innovative for his time. Al-Kindi, the philosopher of the Arabs. Yaqub ibn Ishaq al-Kindi, known as the philosopher of the Arabs, lived in 9th century Baghdad and was one of the most important figures in the early Islamic Golden Age. He played a crucial role in introducing Greek philosophy and science to the Islamic world. But he didn't just translate, he synthesized, criticized, and advanced the knowledge he inherited. Al-Kindi worked in the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, that great center of learning. He oversaw the translation of Greek texts into Arabic and wrote over 260 books on subjects ranging from philosophy to mathematics, from optics to music theory, from medicine to cryptography. Yes, cryptography. Al-Kindi wrote a book called A Manuscript on Deciphering Cryptographic Messages that described the first known frequency analysis method for breaking codes. This technique, analyzing how often different letters appear to crack encrypted messages, is still fundamental to cryptography today. Al-Kindi invented it in the 9th century. He also made major contributions to music theory, introducing Arabic letters to represent musical pitches, an early form of musical notation. He wrote about acoustics and the physics of sound. He understood that sound traveled in waves and that pitch was related to the frequency of those waves. In optics, Al-Kindi studied light and vision, laying groundwork that Ibn al-Haytham would later build on. He understood that light travels in straight lines and that vision results from light entering the eye, not from the eye emitting rays, as many Greek philosophers had believed. In mathematics, he introduced Indian numerals to the Islamic world and advocated for their use. He wrote about geometry and arithmetic. He explored the concept of infinity, a topic that would occupy mathematicians for centuries. But perhaps Al-Kindi's most important contribution was philosophical. He argued that philosophy and religion were compatible, that rational inquiry and divine revelation could coexist. He believed that truth was one, and whether discovered through reason or revelation, true insights would never contradict each other. This philosophical position was enormously influential. It created space for scientific inquiry within Islamic civilization. It encouraged Muslims to study Greek philosophy without fear that they were betraying their faith. It established a tradition of rational theology that would shape Islamic thought for centuries, a tradition that would reach its peak with philosophers like Ibn Rushd, Averroes, whose work we'll explore in our next episode alongside the chemist Jabir ibn Hayyan and the physicist Al-Kazini. Al-Kindi also pioneered the idea of using mathematics to understand the natural world. He believed that mathematical relationships governed physical phenomena, an idea that seems obvious now but was revolutionary in his time. This approach would become fundamental to modern science. Yet Al-Kindi is virtually unknown to most people, despite his profound influence on both Islamic and European intellectual history. His works, translated into Latin, influenced medieval European philosophers. His ideas about the compatibility of faith and reason shaped how Europeans thought about these questions. His practical contributions, from cryptography to music theory, laid foundations for entire fields of study. The Banu Musa brothers, the engineering geniuses. In 9th century Baghdad, three brothers, Muhammad, Ahmad, and Al-Hassan, collectively known as the Banu Musa, sons of Moses, ran what was essentially the world's first engineering research institute. They employed translators, mathematicians, and craftsmen. They sponsored the translation of Greek scientific texts, and they created some of the most sophisticated machines of the medieval world. Their book, The Book of Ingenious Devices, described 100 different mechanical inventions: automated fountains, self-playing musical instruments, trick vessels, and innovative valves and pumps. These weren't just toys, they represented serious engineering innovations. The Banu Musa invented the first programmable automated machine, a music player that could be programmed to play different songs by arranging pegs on a cylinder. This principle would later be used in music boxes and, eventually, early computers. They invented double concentric siphons, automatic valves, and variable flow fountains. They created vessels with hidden chambers that produce surprising effects: pour water in, and wine comes out, thanks to clever use of air pressure and hidden reservoirs. But their most important contribution might have been their work on the House of Wisdom's translation program. The Banu Musa sponsored the translation of key Greek mathematical and scientific texts. They paid translators generously, often weighing finished translations in gold. They sought out rare manuscripts from across the known world. One of their employees was the great mathematician and astronomer Thabit ibn Qurra, who made important contributions to astronomy, mathematics, and mechanics. Another was Hunayn ibn Ishaq, perhaps the greatest translator of Greek medical texts. The brothers themselves made original contributions to mathematics. They worked on geometry, particularly the problem of trisecting an angle and duplicating a cube, classical problems that had challenged Greek mathematicians. While they couldn't solve these problems completely, we now know they're impossible using only compass and straightedge. Their attempts advanced understanding of geometric principles. In astronomy, they made observations and calculations. In mechanics, they understood principles of hydraulics and pneumatics that wouldn't be fully developed in Europe for centuries. The Banu Musa represent an important aspect of the Islamic Golden Age, the combination of patronage, scholarship, and practical application. They were wealthy enough to fund research, knowledgeable enough to contribute themselves, and wise enough to bring together talented people who could advance human knowledge. Yet they're barely known today, despite their crucial role in preserving Greek knowledge and advancing science and engineering. They're the kind of figures who should be household names but have been almost entirely forgotten. Sutayda al-Mamali, the female mathematician. In 10th century Baghdad, a woman named Sutayda al-Mamali achieved fame as a brilliant mathematician and jurist. Historical sources describe her as excelling in mathematics, particularly in solving complex problems involving inheritance law, which, in the Islamic world, required sophisticated mathematical knowledge. Islamic inheritance laws are notoriously complex, involving fractions, percentages, and elaborate calculations to ensure that each heir receives their proper share according to Quranic guidelines. Sutayda mastered these calculations and became known for her ability to solve problems that stumped other scholars. But she wasn't just a calculator. She was a creative mathematician who could find elegant solutions to difficult problems. She served as a legal consultant, helping people work out complicated inheritance divisions. She taught students, both male and female. She participated in scholarly debates. Historical sources describe her as having memorized thousands of traditions, hadith, and being able to recite poetry extensively. She was what we might call a public intellectual, known throughout Baghdad for her learning. Sutayda represents something important. She's proof that women in the Islamic Golden Age could achieve recognition for intellectual achievement. While they certainly faced barriers and restrictions that men didn't, the doors weren't completely closed. Talented, determined women could become scholars, teachers, and recognized experts. We don't have her mathematical writings today, most have been lost. But her presence in historical sources, the respect she commanded from male scholars, and her reputation for mathematical brilliance all testify to her achievements. She's just one of several notable female mathematicians and scientists in Islamic history. There was Lubna of Córdoba, a 10th-century mathematician and poet who served in the court of the Caliph of Córdoba. There was Fatima al-Fihri, whom we discussed earlier. There was Maryam al-Ajliya, the astrolabe maker. These women remind us that the story of science isn't just a story of men. Women contributed too, even in societies where gender roles were more restrictive than today. Their achievements deserve to be remembered and celebrated. The pattern. Why were they forgotten? As we look at these forgotten scientists, a pattern emerges. Why have their names been erased from popular history while others, often their European successors who built on their work, are remembered? Several factors contributed to this historical amnesia. First, there's simple cultural bias. For centuries, Western historians focused on European achievements while ignoring or minimizing contributions from other civilizations. The narrative of progress was told as a story moving from ancient Greece and Rome, through a dark age, to the European Renaissance and scientific revolution. The Islamic Golden Age didn't fit this narrative, so it was downplayed or ignored. Second, there's the language barrier. Most of these scientists wrote in Arabic. Their works weren't translated into European languages until centuries after they were written, if at all. European scholars built on their ideas but often didn't acknowledge the source, either because they didn't know it or because giving credit to Muslim scientists wasn't fashionable. Third, there's the simple fact that the Islamic Golden Age ended. The Mongol invasions, political fragmentation, economic decline, and intellectual conservatism meant that by the time Europe was experiencing its renaissance, the Islamic world was in decline. Victors write history, and Europe's rise to global dominance in the modern era meant that European perspectives dominated historical narratives. Fourth, many of these scientists' original works have been lost. Books are fragile. Libraries burn. Manuscripts decay. Wars destroy cultural heritage. The Mongol sack of Baghdad in 1258 destroyed countless texts. The Spanish Inquisition burned Arabic books. Natural disasters, fires, and neglect have taken their toll over centuries. As we come to the end of our journey through the forgotten scientists of the Islamic Golden Age, we're left with a profound sense of both loss and inspiration. Loss because so many brilliant minds have been erased from our collective memory, their achievements attributed to others or simply forgotten. Inspiration because their stories remind us of human potential and the universal nature of scientific inquiry. Ibn al-Nafis discovered blood circulation 400 years before it was officially discovered in Europe. Fatima al-Fihri founded the world's first university in 859 CE, creating an educational model we still follow today. Al-Jazari built programmable robots in 1206. Ibn Zur performed the first clinical trials and experimental surgeries. Maryam al-Ajliya crafted instruments that navigated the seas. Al-Biruni calculated Earth's radius with astonishing accuracy using primitive tools. Ibn Tufayl wrote novels that shaped the European Enlightenment.
Abbas ibn Firnas fleu in 875 CE.
Al-Kindi invented cryptography and advanced music theory. The Banu Musa brothers created the first programmable machines. Sutayda al-Mamali solved mathematical problems that stumped her male contemporaries. These weren't minor figures making small contributions. They were giants who advanced human knowledge in fundamental ways. They proved that scientific inquiry transcends culture, religion, and language. They showed that progress requires openness to ideas from different sources. They demonstrated that supporting education and research yields extraordinary returns. Their achievements also challenge simplistic narratives about science and progress. Science isn't uniquely European. The scientific method wasn't invented in the Renaissance, it was practiced in Baghdad and Cairo centuries earlier. The march of progress isn't linear or inevitable. Civilizations rise and fall. Knowledge can be lost as well as gained. But perhaps most importantly, these forgotten scientists remind us that every generation stands on the shoulders of those who came before. The European scientists we revere, Galileo, Newton, Harvey, Leonardo, built on foundations laid by Muslim scientists. And those Muslim scientists built on Greek, Indian, Persian, and Chinese knowledge. Science is a collective human endeavor, and every culture has contributed. Today, we face global challenges that require scientific solutions. Climate change, disease, energy, food security. Solving these problems will require the best minds from every culture, every nation, every background. The forgotten scientists of the Islamic Golden Age remind us that genius appears everywhere, that excluding people from scientific endeavors because of their religion, gender, or origin is not just unjust, it's foolish. As you go about your day tomorrow, remember Ibn al-Nafis when your heart beats. Remember Fatima al-Firi when you attend class or earn a degree. Remember al-Jazari when you drive a car with a camshaft engine. Remember Ibn Zur when you benefit from clinical trials and evidence-based medicine. Remember all these forgotten names and the civilization that nurtured them. They changed the world. It's time we remember them. But this is just part 2 of our journey. We've covered so many incredible scientists, but there are still more stories to tell. In the next and final part of this series, we're going to explore 8 more brilliant minds who shaped our world. Al-Idrisi, whose maps guided explorers for centuries. Al-Dinawari, the father of Islamic botany who catalogued plants across the empire. Jabir ibn Hayyan, who transformed alchemy into chemistry. Al-Kazini, whose work in physics was centuries ahead of his time. Ibn Rushd, Averroes, whose philosophical works bridged Islamic and European thought. Nasir al-Din al-Tusi, the astronomer whose planetary models influenced Copernicus. Al-Sufi, who created the most accurate star catalogue of his era. And Ibn Bajjah, who made groundbreaking contributions to both medicine and astronomy. Each of these scientists has a story that deserves to be told. Each made contributions that echo through the centuries. And together, they represent the incredible breadth and depth of achievement during the Islamic Golden Age. If these stories moved you, if you're amazed by how much we've forgotten, then you absolutely cannot miss part 3 of this series. We're going to cover Al-Idrisi and his revolutionary geography, Al-Dinawari's pioneering work in botany, Jabir ibn Hayyan, who laid the foundations of chemistry, Al-Kazini's brilliant physics, the philosopher Ibn Rushd, whose ideas shaped both Islamic and European thought, the astronomical genius Nasir al-Din al-Tusi, Al-Sufi, who mapped the heavens, and Ibn Bajjah, who bridged medicine and astronomy. Subscribe to Chronicles of the Faith right now and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the final episode of this trilogy. And if you haven't watched part 1 where we covered Al-Khwarizmi, Ibn al-Haytham, Al-Razi, Al-Battani, and Al-Zarawi, go watch it after this. You need the complete story. Hit that like button if you learned something incredible today, and tell us in the comments which of these forgotten scientists surprised you the most. Whose story needs to be shared with the world? Let's start a movement to give these brilliant minds the recognition they deserve. Until next time, keep seeking knowledge, keep questioning what you've been told, and keep the faith.